General Milley almost certainly committed treason, which is why Joe Biden gave him the pardon. Now, CNN has their own spin on it. They're not entirely upfront with those facts. We have those facts. Welcome to the Doug TenNapel channel. Here's CNN trying to create this big backlash against Trump. Pure spin. They learned nothing from the election. Once again, I love watching CNN go down the tubes.
Retired chair of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley. Overnight, the Pentagon revoked his security detail and his security clearance. In addition, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth directed the Inspector General to launch an investigation into Milley's conduct. This could lead to an eventual demotion, even in retirement. Why? Well, General Milley, who was initially nominated by Trump himself, is seen to have stood up to him, including following the insurrection. Trump later suggested it was treasonous that it, quote, times gone by, the punishment would have been death.
Now, they just misapplied that quote that is a quote from Trump, but that was not the context over January 6th at all. Now, CNN actually knows the context. I'll give it to you briefly. I got this from Grok. General Mark Milley, the then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had made two notable calls to his Chinese counterpart, General Li Zuosheng. These calls were aimed at reassuring China about U.S. stability and intentions, particularly in light of the tumultuous period following the 2020 U.S. election and the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot. In one call, Milley reportedly told Lee that he would warn him if the U.S. was planning an attack on China, which was perceived by some as going behind Trump's back. Now, he did not tell Trump that. And Trump is the president, and he went behind his back. That's treason. To work with a communist enemy of America, that is, in fact, inarguably treason. They may not do anything about it, but I'm only saying CNN knows those facts.
This morning, it does seem the president is getting his retribution. Let's get right to CNN's Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon with these overnight moves. Good morning, Oren.
Good morning, John. President Donald Trump has long had it out for General Mark Milley, and this through his new defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, on his second day at the job. Looks like it's part of that getting back at him.
Now, is it just getting back at him? Why? Now, the way that they spin even that, look, they're all Trump, this is retribution. This is just getting back. This is just political. CNN never said anything about that on Biden going after Trump or Biden's DOJ going after Trump. In lawfare lawsuits, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, investigations, Russiagate, even impeachments. Those were never seen as political retribution by CNN, and it's because they're Democrats and they're protecting their own, and Trump's a Republican and a winner, huge, massive winner, and so they have to attack him with these little tiny. But I'm only saying this is spin because they don't use these same words to apply to both sides when both sides are doing similar, if not the same things.
Hegseth and the Pentagon put out a statement late last night saying that he'd ordered that his security detail and security clearance be removed. Milley has had a security detail ever since the U.S. assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Milley was one of those under threat from the Iranians, as were several other former Trump administration officials. Milley has also been more openly critical of Trump, calling him a fascist, and in this final speech as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, offering this barely veiled criticism of Trump.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it.
Volunteer military. It falls under the president. The president represents the civilian-run military. It's not a separate from the presidency. That's why we called him the commander-in-chief. This general and all military serves under the president at his will. There's another code of conduct where a lower general cannot undermine or publicly critique the president. That is actual in their code, and he violated it both under Trump and when he was under Biden talking about Trump. So he should have his entire retirement reduced or removed. He should definitely be deranked, and that's probably going to happen, I predict, under Hegseth.
We have reached out to Milley for comment. It's also worth noting that Milley is not the only former Trump administration official who's had his security detail and clearance revoked. Former National Security Advisor John Bolton, former CIA Director Mike Pompeo, and others have been through the same thing.
We should note, Oren, I do believe that General Milley was one of the people who received a preemptive pardon from outgoing President Biden. So this Inspector General investigation, what could that lead to?
Milley did receive a pardon in the final hours of the Biden administration. Now that protects him from criminal prosecution and prosecution under military law. So there isn't that much in the legal perspective that you can go after him for because of that pardon. But this Inspector General investigation could try to strip Milley of rank, try to demote him after his retirement and his more than 40 years in the service. The question is, what is the conduct here that's questionable? And that was not offered in the statement. No rationale was given.
Making the phone call to a Chinese communist enemy is plenty. So they can't prosecute him criminally, but you can demote him, you can reduce his retirement, you can do all that stuff, de-rank him. It's just a matter of shaming. And I think it's fine. I think it's good to set that precedent to warn future people in the military, no, you can't do that to the president, the top of your rank, and not have, even if you get pardoned, it will affect you, and it should.
Trump and others have tried to go after Milley for a pair of phone calls with his Chinese counterpart in the closing months of the first Trump administration. Trump even posted on Truth Social that it would have been, those calls were treasonous and would have been a reason for a death penalty in earlier times. Milley has testified openly about those, and they were coordinated with the Secretaries of Defense and the national security agencies.
And they were coordinated with China behind Trump's back. The point is, he did not come forward with Trump. He didn't get his permission. It was clearly a workaround and clearly treason, and nothing these guys say take that away. And that's what Biden was protecting. The treason of General Milley.
They could also try to go after him for the Afghanistan withdrawal, but John, it's worth remembering that Milley opposed that withdrawal, and it was only carried out because first Trump and then Biden ordered it.
These are important distinctions. Oren Lieberman at the Pentagon this morning. A lot going on there. Keep us posted.
Milley was asked about Trump's treason comment back in 2023, and this is what he told 60 Minutes.
As much as these comments are directed at me, it's also directed at the institution of the military. And there's 2.1 million of us in uniform. If we're willing to die for that document, if we're willing to deploy to combat, if we're willing to lose an arm, a leg, an eye, to protect and support and defend that document and protect the American people, then we're willing to live for it too.
Yeah, and you utterly failed, because it's not just a vow to that document, but you're there for the upper rank of president too, for which you serve. And you totally went against him, and you totally defied the Constitution even, and your own code of conduct, all the laws. So don't give me this Constitution stuff. It's almost like stolen valor, what he's doing. He really doesn't mean this stuff, and he's snowing them.
There are so many points of friction between Trump and Milley over the years that it's hard to pinpoint exactly which one this is coming from. There was also, of course, the time that Milley joined Trump when they walked across Lafayette Square during the Black Lives Matter protests, and Milley later apologized for appearing with Trump in that moment.
And that's another weird political moment. He wants to chum up to Trump when it looks good for a photo op. He friendly, takes a picture with Trump as they were observing the area during Black Lives Matter. And then he got backlash for standing next to Trump. Then he comes out and issues a statement, I shouldn't have done, all to shame the president. Little demoralization. Yeah, derank him, take away his retirement.
Hegseth has also ordered an inspector general to review Hegseth's, quote, conduct.
Now, she says Hegseth's conduct, she means Milley's conduct. If she just reads the CNN Chiron, it says the same thing.
Which is quite a broad mandate for an inspector general, and also ironic considering that Trump recently just fired all of the agency inspectors general. So how exactly will this work?
Right, I guess inspector generals are great when they're doing something you want, when they potentially, lift the lid on corruption or abuses of power. Perhaps they're not so good, but I take your point about the political generals, and I think that's a very good point. But at the same time, it's hard to look at this and not see personal retribution on behalf of the president, especially when you view it in the context of the withdrawn security details for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and John Bolton. It's interesting that this, along with the executive orders on the transgender troops, that's the first thing that Hegseth presided over before, as soon as he got to the Pentagon. So it does suggest that clearly he's going to spend his tenure perhaps advancing the president's social goals. But one thing I would say is that China and Russia, those generals and grizzled defense officials that Hegseth is going to have to deal with, are watching this, and they see a Pentagon that's fighting against itself and not mustered against America's enemies.
Who started the fight as the Pentagon's fighting against itself? Who started it? They're acting like it's Trump. It was not started by Trump. It started by all the DEI, trans stuff that Biden put in there. It's these generals that think they're above the president and despise Trump and try to demoralize him. So China watches now Pete Hegseth straighten out the Pentagon. Get in line, guys. It's time to go back to being lethal instead of trying to use our general like Milley did as a job interview to be on the board of Raytheon and Boeing.
Well, there was notably a very large chasm between Trump and his generals in the first term, so much so that there was a book written about it by Susan Glasser and Peter Baker, and they reported that Milley actually threatened to resign, drafted a resignation letter that he then unsent. And that letter, according to Glasser and Baker, said, "It is my belief that you are doing great and irreparable harm to my country. I believe that you have made a concerted effort over time to politicize the United States military. I thought that I could change that. I've come to the realization that I cannot." Of course, that was drafted by Milley and then unsent, reportedly.
How many of you have ever had a whole letter that you drafted and then chose not to send it? That is, you just delete it. How many of you have had that stuff leaked to the press?
But Sabrina, how high are the stakes if you're a general in Trump's second administration and you see some of the actions that he's taken now?
I mean, I think there has to be huge alarm for generals right now in the military, for anyone in the military, to see the politicization about this. I mean, to be clear, though, this is not surprising. This is something that Donald Trump promised. I think a lot of what we're discussing this morning and we will be discussing in the days to come are things that Donald Trump said specifically he was going to do on the campaign trail. And him talking about General Milley is one of those things where we knew there would be some type of retribution, there would be some type of, review. The blanket pardon that former President Biden put in place did not come out of nowhere. It came from motivations and the belief that Trump would be going after Milley. So I think for generals right now, there is a question how to toe this line of supporting the President of the United States, and you're supporting the Constitution, and you're supporting the American people. And how does that dovetail?
Dovetail. When you stab the president in the back in the name of the Constitution, doesn't work. CNN, nice spin. And they're just taking Biden's side, even Biden's claim that he only pardoned Milley to protect him from political retribution. That's an opinion. That's a Democrat opinion. That's a Biden cover-up opinion, which is my opinion. But CNN just copy and pastes Biden's opinion like it's fact. No, there's another opinion that Biden covered up, pardoned people like his son who's guilty, and maybe he also pardoned Fauci because he was guilty of something. Adam Schiff, Liz Cheney, Raskin, because they were guilty of something. And yes, Milley, because he was guilty of something.
Other countries are watching here, and this is just weakening America's place in the world with other countries because we are just letting China and other countries know we have all these weaknesses, and this is how you can get to us.
The way that you get to us is by calling General Milley. That's what communist China learned. It's not from our division. He was on the phone with our communist enemies already, ratting out the president, saying, look, if there's some kind of an attack, I will call you and warn you. Do you realize what that means? I'm not justifying an act of war against China, but if that's the president's decision, and you have a general like Milley going to the enemy for which there's an attack against them, and he says, I'll warn you, enemy, that's what Trump means. That is treason.
Let's be also honest. Milley's a political animal himself, right? That letter didn't get to Peter Baker and Susan Glasser because it fell out the window, right? Milley leaked a lot of this stuff. And look, that's his right. But there are also consequences if you're on the wrong side of this stuff when it comes to elections. And he is now seeing that. Political, personal, doesn't matter. It's all the same.
Great point by Matt Gorman, the only Republican on that whole panel there at CNN. He makes a point. That letter got leaked because Mark Milley is a drama queen. He took a letter, he didn't have the balls to send it to Trump, so he deletes it, leaks it to the press. What a scum. I'm laughing at him. This guy's a clown. He's got to go. We got a new boss in town with Pete Hegseth. Yes, this is going to be so good. And yes, Pete Hegseth, it's the most honorable thing he can do is to look Milley in the eye and for Milley to say, yes, sir, as he is demoted and properly punished. They ought to court-martial him, but they can't. I'm Doug, in exile,